Let me start off with this. If there's one thing that kills off the PvP population in an MMORPG faster than absolutely anything else, it's the PvPers. Hello ladies and gentlemen, WillE here. PvP used to be all I did in MMOs. Imagine playing these sprawling online fantasy worlds filled with other players from around the globe, and then all you want to do is fight these scripted dragons and goblins. How dumb is that? What are you, some kind of noob? You scared? You want to 1v1 me, mate? Get your gear and head over to Edgeville. The first PvP I experienced was in RuneScape, like RuneScape back before it was old school RuneScape, or RuneScape 3, RuneScape 2. And of course, as I imagine it was for many of you guys, it was accidental. There I was, the fresh noob off of Tutorial Island. I meandered my way through Lumbridge, made it past the Dark Wizards and the South Varrock Gate, and made it through Varrock, kept heading north past the castle and the church, and made it to the guards out of town, where I was met with dozens of players. I crossed a magical line on the map, and I just entered the wilderness and was promptly sent back to Lumbridge faster than you can say poorly cooked Karambwan. And I went straight back. All those people out there with all their gear and weapons, if I could take down even just one of them, that could all be mine. Through this, I started to learn the ropes. Magic is really OP at low levels, but you gain combat levels fast. Ranged is accurate, but you have lots of ammo to use, and melee strong, but the armor and weapons can weigh you down. And I went on to PvP in RuneScape for years, making Pures, Void Rangers, Zerkers, free-to-play Pures, you name it, I probably had it. And I was into my PvP and maximizing the power of my character, like really into it. I'd wake up at 4 or 5 a.m. to creep downstairs in winter to train strength on experiments with a propane heater, roasting one of my legs whilst the other froze. And it wasn't until Jagex literally changed PvP in its entirety to combat real money trading, which didn't work by the way, that I finally started to move away from it. At which point I went on to PvP in WoW, mainly Twinking and Battlegrounds. With arenas, I never got into them, to be honest, which they've since become one of the pillars, quite literally, of PvP in many online games due to the ability to put a deterministic number of players against one another. But it feels like it takes a bit of the massively multiplayer out of it for the sake of trying to allow balance, when typically they haven't been able to balance it either, as there is a direct crossover with PvE content. Sure, some people like arenas all the same. Fun is very much subjective, but then again, some people like Marmite and Mumble Rap. If there's one person you can't trust, it's people. Anyway, so when I heard RuneScape was going to be re-releasing, I was very hyped to start PKing again, just like the good old days. I made my character and started building them up, doing those starter quests. You had Fight Arena, Waterfall, Lost City, Recipe for Disaster, Gnome Village. Get the stats up, you know, all the beginner stuff. I ended up with a build I wanted, which was 60 attack and whatever strength and range I had, 1 defense, 44 prayer. Not exactly the best build in the world, but one I like due to the variety of weapons and special attacks you can use. I headed on over into the wilderness, and everyone was using the exact same setup, which was ranged to G-Maul, of course, and each fight felt like a copy-paste of the last, the current, and the next, and it was really, really boring. I went over to check North Varrock, where it all started for me, and there were some people there following launch, but it died out so fast. And that was the lifeblood of PvP back then. I tried PKing over the next few days and just came to the conclusion this wasn't for me, and I had the choice of trying to push my character up through the next combat brackets. Would things be different there, or would I just be met with another 100 template characters again? And in the end, I decided to make it into my main, and I've never really looked back in PvP and RuneScape. Nowadays on it, well, for RuneScape 3, PvP is literally completely dead, and for old school, there's some activity there, but it's fairly niche compared to other stuff. And I am a person that's competitive with games. Competition can be really fun and one of the most interesting and driving factors in gaming. Not only had I made however many characters I did on RuneScape for PKing, I played League of Legends for years where I reached Diamond on several different roles. I think passing is fun in World of Warcraft, and maximizing your character is something which I find interesting. In fact, with old school RuneScape, they released a pure PvP mode called Dead Man Mode Reborn about 1 week ago, which was a seasonal server. This is a version of the game where near the entire world is PvP flagged, combined with old school RuneScape's looting system and some of the extra rules they have in place for the particular season. This is literally the dream game for the PvP fanatic, and the population has absolutely fallen off a cliff within the space of little over a week. It highlights in a microcosm the issues that will always exist when you try and put the PvP genre together with an MMO. Now, seasonal servers do solve some of these problems, as they can fully embrace the need to not overly get heavy-handed in balance, because it's not going to last forever. But a seasonal MMORPG is a little bit of an oxymoron, don't you think? Because even if you make an MMORPG specifically for PvP, it's not difficult to start to run into a certain list of issues. First of which is MMOs do not have a reset button. In PvP games, an equal footing in the game matters. At the end of a game of League of Legends or of Overwatch or of Fortnite, the game entirely hits the reset button and you start the next with an equal opportunity to make the same choices of another person between hero, runes, gear, weapons, whatever it may be. When you get a reset after a game of Arena, you're still there with the same differences in your character which existed prior. There's no difference or rebalancing in between. Due to this, players who often invest more time than others have huge inbuilt advantages in the game. Again, this is something which you should expect to exist within an MMO, where time investment is a measure of player progression, but it can often make it increasingly hard for a newer player to find their feet in PvP games when they have to overcome a barrier put in place by the game itself. On top of the actual barrier of gear, we have the skill barrier, which can exist in any game of course, but often losing in an MMO can be tied to things such as gear or XP losses as well. And coming into an online PvP MMO space as a new player, well, it's not exactly often the most welcoming of communities. A wise man once said, the quickest way to kill a hobby is for the veterans to be total jerks to the newbies. If you want things to flourish, you have to invite and encourage new folks getting into it. This is painfully true for MMORPG PvP. Call them ego gamers, but people who are a bit more invested than they probably should have, but them having played a lot more than you and having many advantages over you will be something they lord over you to the best of their ability. And they're going to make damn well sure what they like about PvP is known, because often in MMO PvP, you either do the PvP content or you are the PvP content. This is particularly true in older games where they have a lack of built-in game mechanics to prevent griefing. Simply put, the games are not fair, and that's the game you're expected to gain new players in, where anyone can gank anywhere, or you can possibly even lose items to somebody 4 times the level of you, and you're meant to shrug it off and say, yeah, that's part of the game, this is fun, I enjoy this. And unfortunately, it takes very, very few players to hamper the experience of many. In some cases, one single person can camp or gank a dozen out of the game in the space of an hour. It's something which a developer has to consider, or you can bet your open world will become a barren wasteland at the hands of few players who will take part in the most destructive gameplay possible and say, well, if you don't like it, just leave. And guess what? People do that. They leave. This goes doubly so for unrestricted open world PvP, especially with factions. It's quite literally doomed to fail. We've seen players clap and cheer saying go to retail or classic isn't for you to others as they leave their server to go somewhere where they are now a majority or a PvE. It's people actually encouraging their server to die and for what they enjoy doing in the game to die as well. I'm not quite sure what to liken this to in real life, as no example of something so absolutely stupid comes to mind, but to have an ecosystem that needs new players and fresh blood, and to simultaneously bully and force them out of the game and then call it PvP is just crazy. And then do the old surprise Pikachu face, why is my game / server dying? It's just a baffling lack of introspection, to be honest. You know, when New World was first announced that it was going to be a full loot PvP sandbox game, and then back in January 2020, Amazon went back on, well, literally the entire philosophy of the game and made it into an opt-in PvP system with more PvE elements, and it's being pretty hyped up at the moment, as I'm sure you know if you're into your MMOs, and I'm going to be trying it on launch for sure. But why did this huge change happen? Well, the full loot PvP community killed the game in alpha. Thanks for saving us from the disaster on release, boys. You really can't help yourselves, can you? Here's a post from the developer on the New World subreddit. One of the problems we observed with the system was that some high-level players were killing low-level players. A lot. Sometimes exclusively. This often led to solo or group griefing scenarios that created a toxic environment for many players. To be clear, this behavior was not shown by all PvP players, but enough to cause significant issues. Remember, it takes very few players to grief many. Ego players and self-destructive gameplay. New World prior had all three, and it would have become a real small niche game within the space of a couple of weeks. Not without its issues at the moment either. The huge change from full loot PvP to flagging with more PvE is undoubtedly there to bring in more people from WoW and Final Fantasy XIV, but you can't blame Amazon for moving away from this. But there were other avenues that were worth exploring as well. Maybe before they went all the way down this extreme, because there are some games out there with heavy PvP involvement that are to this day still enjoying success. Albion Online has been a PvP-centered game, growing notably with the recent launch of the mobile version in summer, peaking at 271k concurrent players online. And in this game it features a number of different types of zones: blue, yellow, red and black, ranging from no PvP, losing some durability, all the way to dropping all of your items. It gives the new players environments to actually learn what's going on in the game without heavily resetting their progress. Once you have some confidence in your ability, you can move on and upwards to the riskier zones. Sounds a lot better than the game where max level can sit outside of a starter zone and chain gank people with absolutely zero repercussions. In fact, I'm really interested in giving this game a proper go and want to share that with you guys at some point. Perhaps there's something more to MMO PvP than trying to stick it out with what the PvE theme parks offer us. Unfortunately though, for a lot of players, it's once bitten, twice shy when it comes to PvP encounters within MMO content. In games where progression, building gear sets and choices can be key, having those reset back when you have little real chance to defend yourself against an opponent isn't something that too many will throw themselves against again and again. You only have to look at some of the more popular MMOs at the moment, where PvP is, well, from what I hear about Final Fantasy XIV, it's more about who's got the coolest looking outfit, and in WoW, PvP feels like it's been in managed decline for years. PvP servers are totally failing in TBC because, surprisingly, nobody wants to be on the minority faction, and there's been a considerable rise of the more casual-friendly collection or PvP content, which bring in a clear metric to more players. It's no wonder developers err towards that side of content instead. PvP, unfortunately, often feels like it's tacked on the side of the game as a box ticker, as this is a feature that we need to have in the genre, rather than actually being something which equal time and effort can be afforded to, similar to dungeons and raids. Even the war in World of Warcraft, this is something I hear a lot. How can a game with war in its title not be about PvP? I mean, when it released with about 24 dungeons, 2 40-man raids for PvP, no arena, no battlegrounds, PvE servers, no loot loss or XP loss, no extra dangerous zones. At the time, it was even considered a much more casual-friendly MMO, when others had you lose items or XP. The PvP in WoW was I can attack a red bar on my screen. Maybe it was enough back then, sure, but it wasn't exactly much, was it? You know, I'm surprised Amazon ever went for a full loot PvP sandbox game in the first place. I wouldn't expect any big PvP MMO to come out of a big dev, well, ever really anymore. They simply fit a more niche crowd, which is fine, but why make millions when you can make, well, I guess a few more millions. It's always been a tough endeavor to make a PvP game, and at the center of it, it's that balance between competition and risk, as well as a degree of fairness to keep players feeling engaged, and that despite the boundaries MMOs can put up, they do have a realistic chance to compete in the world, and that's where they also struggle. That's why there are far more dungeon, PvE, raid, lobby, theme park, call them what you will, MMOs. They don't have to pull off this balancing act anywhere near the same. They can just throw in some PvP elements here and there and say, yeah, our game's got PvP. Totally. There's no risk of leaving the player feeling helpless, lost, or alienated. PvP games are much more likely to be niche and ergo less profitable. And if allowed, your most hardcore and dedicated players will actively work against growing the game. And PvP by and large tends to be a bit less of a welcoming environment, when these days a lot of people when they log in don't want stress or problems or to argue, they just want to chill out. And I don't think that's really too hard to understand. That's the video though. Let me know your thoughts on it. I imagine this is going to be a good one to read back afterwards. As always guys, thank you so much for watching and listening in, and I will see you all in the next one very soon.